Hello again, Professor Wills here. So we're talking about three-dimensional art, methods and materials. In terms of methods, though, I want to talk a little bit about the techniques for creating three-dimensional artworks. They include carving, modeling, assembling, performance, and tech-based media. What I'm going to do is address carving, modeling, and assembling in this video presentation, and look for more information about performance and tech-based media in our modules in this Unit 1 lesson. All right, let's pivot to the PowerPoints. All right, what we're looking at here, again, are these techniques associated with creating three-dimensional artworks. The art items I've already mentioned, you can see typed out for you on the upper left, and we'll go through them in order. What we're looking at now is an example of carving. It's the entrance doorway of a Maori meeting house, created in 1883. The Maori people are associated with the country we now call New Zealand. The media include carved and painted wood. Carving is done by removing material from a medium in a way that's known as a subtractive process, taking away unwanted material. That's the case with what we've seen previously, whether our Moai head freestanding sculptures on Easter Island or the presidential portraits on Mount Rushmore. But this process obviously works as well if your medium is wood, and there is an abundance of wood for the Maori people with which to work for the various sculptures, particularly associated with their meeting houses. The abundance of that material means that they are able to use various implements to sculpt with. And as metal eventually arrived to New Zealand, the precision and the detail work only increased, as you see in these examples right here. So these could represent ancestor figures, just like we saw on Easter Island. In fact, often the Maori meeting houses have a lot of reference to family, to the lineage of the family tree, to the power of the ancestors. And in fact, we'll talk in our unit on ritualistic spaces about the symbolic meaning of the architecture itself and how important it is to the Maori people. But just as a start to the concept of carving, this is one example of carving. Let's move on to modeling. When you have a malleable substance like clay, from which this bowl by artist Maria Martinez was created in the early 20th century. It's an example of black ware. You can manipulate a soft, malleable medium like clay or even wax. And more often than not, this involves not a subtractive process, but an additive process as the medium is added or built up to create a sculpture, or perhaps manipulated to create a bowl shape. Most of us think of the process of making pots with clay as an example of an additive sculptural process, whether made using snake-like coils of clay or slabs of clay. This medium can then be pinched and joined together to an impressively refined level in the work of Maria Martinez, who created this without the aid of a potter's wheel. She is a tremendous example of an American indigenous artist from the Southwest who invented the blackware technique with both glossy and matte abstract designs that make her products desirable in the early 20th century and super collectible even today. Continuing with our examination of modeling, I mentioned wax, but I'm not talking about just manipulating wax to make novelty candles for various holiday seasons, but it's an ancient medium used to create bronze sculptures in an ancient technique known as the lost wax process, used by such cultures with great sophistication, such as the ancient Greeks. So you see that as an example on the left with this sculpture called the Marathon Boy, dating from 330 BCE. It's a bronze sculpture that's life-sized that was created using the lost wax process. Believe it or not, this is not a solid bronze sculpture. As you can see on the chart on the right, that delineates some of the steps involved in the lost wax process, the artist would first create something that is the idea of the sculpture, rendering it in clay. And then there would be a process where that sculpture would be coated in wax and further refined. A cast would then be constructed over the original clay core and the wax coating, and forming a kind of cast, flipping it upside down, and with the appropriate channels already created by the artist, the molten metal would then be poured into that space. And the result is, when you crack it open, is you would have a very accurate depiction of that sculpture you're going for. And it would not be solid weight all the way through. Unfortunately, bronze sculptures from ancient times are rare, since metals are the first things to be melted and repurposed into weapons or other practical items in times of war or societal decline. Next up, let's explore assembling. So another technique for creating a three-dimensional artwork involves assembling. So sculptures made with various elements, either made or found, and put together or assembled in a way that creates a composition that conveys the concept desired by the artist. Sometimes they're known as assemblages. The Nkizi Nyong'o figure that you see on the left from the Congo people of Central Africa was often used by a shaman as a sculpture with which to perform a service to a client wishing to have a wish fulfilled with the divine intervention of ancestors or other divine forces. So various elements would be attached to this figure, including charms, beads, and nails that have been added, each of which represent a different client appointment, if you will, with the shaman, and the shaman serving as an intercessor between this world and the next. Something from the 20th century, as an example of assembling or assemblage, is the work of Joseph Cornell. This is called Susie's Son for Judy Tyler from 1957. And Cornell's work is very recognizable because it has this almost shadow box-like presentation of various found objects that he's collected, whether from nature, whether from discarded commercial products. And so they have, references of things that have been discarded or cast off. His work can be very nostalgic and wistful, even surreal. But in the case of this example, it's a tribute to a young actress from the famous Elvis Presley movie Jailhouse Rock, who died in a car accident, cast away herself too soon. The sun that you can see on the upper right-hand side is from a food tin, cut out and attached. It's meant to evoke the passing of time. And there are additional references to the ocean below and its cycles with things that were once alive, like a seashell and a piece of driftwood. Coming up next, we're going to talk about new technologies and how they have informed three-dimensional art as well. And that includes the art of performance.